All right. Well, thank you, Tessa, for sitting down with me and talking about some of your contributions to this ASPN, as well as the some of the backstory behind the society. I figured maybe we'd start with just a little bit about you and how your interest in peripheral nerve started.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and I really appreciate that. And I started off my career with Gerta Verbova in Birmingham. And I actually started, she had the weirdest idea. You know, ever heard of Katz and Milady?
Yeah.
Okay, so Katz and Milady had done all this work with the calcium, showing that the importance of calcium in acetylcholine release and they reported and so on. She didn't believe it. So my project was to lower the calcium and measure with assay the amount of calcium release. Well, I mean, you lower the calcium and the release gets lower and lower. Couldn't measure it. It was silly. I wouldn't say silly idea, pretty silly anyway. Anyhow, I changed to looking at acetylcholine and the effect of calcium on the acetylcholine response. And that was my thesis. Anyway, I really always wanted to look at peripheral nerve regeneration. And she said to me that her supervisor and a colleague in Czechoslovakia, Ernest Gutman, had done it all. He had done it all. So I started. And I was in Birmingham for 8 years, and we actually looked at the development of acetylcholine sensitivity and so in chicks. Then I moved to Edmonton, and I never applied for a job or did anything until my children. I have two girls. They were what were they at the time? They were 6 and 3, and I then went to see. I went to see my husband when he got a job in Edmonton. He had gone to the physiology department and left my CV with Mark Poznansky. Do you know Mark Poznansky?
I know the name, yeah.
Okay, so I went to see him, and Dick Stein walked into the door. It was April, and he said to he was talking about, he was giving over exam papers. He had marked his and he was giving them to Mark. He said, well, why don't you come and see me? Now, of course, I'd heard about Dick Stein, and Dick Stein was a physicist and pretty bright physicist. Anyway, he said, you can come work for me part-time, which is what I wanted. And that started me, and actually there, I got an opportunity to work on peripheral nerve regeneration. We had he was working with nerve cups around the sciatic and branches of the sciatic, looking at what happened after exotomy and during reinnervation. And I persuaded him that I'd like to look at motor units. And that's actually how I started everything. I was very happy to do that. And I started actually with a heritage position in pharmacology. Now, I've never done pharmacology and I've got no memory. So teaching pharmacology was a challenge. Anyway, and that's where I was. And I was very appreciative of the Heritage Foundation. In fact, I was one of 3 who went the whole way with the Heritage Foundation. And but the pharmacology department was not my home. And I actually joined Ming Chang in his department.
Yeah.
And so that's basically my career. And peripheral nerve injury always interested me, and how did I get involved with ASPN? Oh, I think I got involved with ASPN when I came to Toronto
Hmm.
and worked with Ming Chen, not with Ming Chen, with Greg Borchell. And again, I came to Toronto because my husband had become a head of pathology at Sick Kids, and not what his name, but anyway, he asked me whether I would start a lab with Greg. You know, Greg was young, and that's how that happened. So that's briefly my career, and I think that I joined ASPN around that time.
Hmm.
Not sure what I did before that. I don't think I did when I was in Edmonton. And I really always enjoyed the clinical relevance of peripheral nerve degeneration. And in fact, as a plastic surgeon, his name was Davis. We published with him right at the start. He initially did all the surgeries for Dick Stein, after which I did. But he said, you know, that peripheral nerve surgery is uncommonly, it's not as successful as you might think. And that started my interest in what was responsible for poor nerve degeneration. That's where I used this model of chronic denervation, chronic exotomy. And then joining the ASPN, I really was, it was for me, a perfect platform to marry basic research in peripheral nerve research with clinical interest.
Hmm.
And I really enjoyed being at ASPN. And what I hope I did as the when I was there, particularly as the president, was to bring in just neurophysiologists and neuroscience.
Well, that's a great overview, Tessa. Yeah, I thought that your year as president was fantastic, and obviously we've got quite a shared interest in the basic science part and leading into the clinical. Maybe why don't you expand a little bit and talk about how important the basic science part is to guide the clinical research, and you know, what you would like to see or what you think are the important parts of basic science that maybe clinicians should be aware of.
Well, you know, I've fought for a long time to make clinical scientists realize that the effects of chronic denervation are not that the end organ just deteriorates and dies. And there is evidence that that you know the satellite cells remain for sufficient times to allow reinnervation. The biggest problem is that they may become depleted with time. And that, I mean, I've been talking to, what's his name, somebody who's very interested in trying to get denervated muscle to accept reinnervation. You know, the satellite cell, I think, is an important thing to look at in the future of reinnervation of muscle anyway. I don't know about the reanimation of sensory organs. You know, sensory organs, I actually don't know what happens to the muscle spindles, tendon organs. You know, the ones in the skin, you can get free nerve endings in the skin. Whether that's going to elicit pain, I don't know. So the sensory side of it is a very neglected part of it. You know, it has been for years and years. And I think that is important. I think that the electrical stimulation has a lot of potential, and I really hope it gets off the ground. I know more and more people are using it. And I think that your conditioning electrical stimulation has potential for nerve transfers, and but I don't know its potential for nerve injury, or, you know, when you have an injury. I don't know, I'd like you to comment on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the short answer of it is we don't also know right yet. I mean, that's certainly an avenue that we're exploring. And I feel like we really only got kind of the tip of the iceberg on conditioning e-stim. I mean, even post e-stim, we're still finding out more and more. I mean, you've talked a little bit and brought it up. Maybe you can walk us through the starting, you know, kind of the early days of electrical stimulation, and what led you to be interested in that, and then maybe the collaborations with Ming for that first trial.
Yeah, so the issue of electrical stimulation for promoting nerve regeneration was really inspired by Nixon Hoff's papers.
Oh.
And Nixon Hoff, I knew Hoff. Did you ever know him?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Yeah, so I was invited to a talk in Germany, and what was it called? Anyway, he came to Goethe's lab. It was 1970s. He came to Goethe's lab to learn how to electrically stimulate. Now, this is another area of interest of mine, which I'll tell you about if you remind me. The effect of electrical stimulation and Henneman's size principle. Do you know what Henneman's size principle?
You might have to remind me.
You see, that's, as you know, it's like Huxley gave a talk in neuroscience about the cross-bridge theory, and he said that it derived from the 1850s. You know, the old literature gets lost, and I'll tell you a story before I tell you about Nixon Hoff.
Yeah.
When I went to Birmingham to do and that also is an interesting story. But anyway, there was a guy who was doing a sabbatical with, who was he doing a sabbatical with? Wasn't with Bernstock. He worked with Jeff Bernstock a lot. And he's an Australian. Anyway, in our library, all of the old literature, which was younger, you know, it was 50s and earlier was in the basement, and 50s and over, because I was there in 1969. Okay. And everything afterwards was upstairs, right upstairs. You know, in the middle was books. He said to me, spend your life in the basement. That's where you should spend your life, in the library, not on the top floor. So you must know the old literature. It was a good piece of advice. Anyway, so Nixon Hoff, he came to Birmingham to learn how to to electrically stimulate, because Goethe had done 10 hertz stimulation and change fast to slow muscles. She worked with a guy called Dirk Petter. Have you heard of Dirk Petter?
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Okay. So he put electrodes on the soleus, on the LGS muscle, on the LGS nerve, and stimulated and measured muscle force at 2-3 weeks after. He crushed the nerve, and the recovery of force increased. And we argued that may be just increasing the rate of muscle innervation, because that's also rate limiting step. And that's why I asked Tom Bouchard about his method of back labeling and using electrical stimulation to determine whether it was accelerating neurodegeneration.
Mm-hmm.
Tom and I worked, and it was wonderful working with Tom, because he was a really bright guy. He in 1993, when he wrote that paper on preferential nerve regeneration into the motor nerves going into the motor branch, I reviewed that paper, and I told, for Journal of Neuroscience, and I met him at Neuroscience, and I told him that I'd reviewed it and how much I liked the paper.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually started us talking. Right. Anyway, that was the start of those experiments of nerve, of nerve stimulation. And I loved the model. It was an excellent model. And with, of course, Kate Alzenberg, she's got a job in Edmonton, right?
Calgary.
Oh, she went to Calgary.
She did, yeah.
Yeah. So she did the work which we did on chronic nerve injury, and it works there too, which was really encouraging to me. That's the most encouraging. It's very important.
Yeah.
So that's when it started, and that's and what happened was Abdul Al-Mayed came to work in my lab, and we, I think I did all the surgeries and did all the counting and all went very well.
And how did the first trial come about with you and me?
Oh, so the first trial was that how did that come about? Maybe I was talking to him and said, it would be nice to have a situation one could try and see if it worked clinically.
Yeah.
And I mean, his technique of working in the counting is fabulous.
Yeah.
And it seemed, the obvious thing to do.
Yeah.
And Ming is such a nice guy. What I was going to tell you about the size principle, if you want to know about the size principle. Also, I was interested in ALS.
Yeah.
But anyway, with the size principle, and actually I'm writing a review at the moment about this. The size principle was Henneman's. Henneman was famous for this. He showed that motor units are recruited in order of size. So, when you're moving, it's the small, slow motor units that come in first and gradually develop first. And it was both with respect to the motor neuron size, nerve size, muscle, muscle force, everything. Then Burke came along. Do you know the name Burke?
Yeah.
So Burke had motor unit types.
Yeah.
And motor unit types were the thing. He didn't believe him. Henneman wrote in, there was in Handbook of Physiology. Henneman and Mendel had a very good review on the size principle. And Burke had a very good review on motor units. And I think there's nobody who works with the motor nerve system should not read those papers. You normally have a direct correlation between the size of a nerve and the force. Also, the inverse of force and contraction speed. So, contraction speed, it's a linear relationship as well. After reinnervation, that's reestablished, and that is quite fascinating, actually, because small nerves like to innervate less muscle fibers than large. And in fact, even with partial denervation, that size principle is obeyed. And so while I was interested in, so for Vic Rayfuse, I asked John Munson to be his external examiner. And, you know, I've always my view of science has always been, if you have somebody who's a competitor of you, it's better to be a collaborator than a competitor. So we started, John Munson and I started to collaborate. And what we did was now why did we do these experiments? Oh, at the same time, that was 1997, Daniel Chanel. Have you heard of Daniel Chanel?
I think so, no.
Okay, Daniel Chanel is a neurophysiologist from Holland. And he just one step back, Gerta de Bova had electrically stimulated nerve with and muscle with 10 hertz and converted fast to slow muscles. And then she collaborated with Dirk Petter for years. And they looked at the conversion of muscle of every enzyme you could think of. He just plowed through. I mean, in my mind, he had no imagination really, but he got a hell of a lot of work done on the back of that. Anyway, Daniel Chanel's work really fascinated me because what he did was he stimulated, he had a heavy section of the spinal cord so that he could impose different patterns of activity. And he did either 10 hertz, 20 hertz, 40 hertz. And it didn't depend at all on the frequency, it depended on how much time the neuromuscular system was active. So I like that idea a lot. So I started with and Munson had also looked at reinnervation with he had looked at reinnervation. That's why I invited him for Vic Rayfuse's PhD exam. He did the same technique as Bob Burke of intracellular recording and stimulation of motor neurons.
Mm-hmm.
So we started off with what Chanel had was if you stimulate for 50% of the day, you got slow motor units. If you stimulated for 5% of the day, you got fast fatigue resistant. And if you stimulated for 0.3 or 0.5, you got the last one. So we started with 50% stimulation he never did motor units, so I did that with John Munster, and it very nice. Changed the speed and all the properties and all the matching properties between motor nerves and motor nerves and muscle. Then if you go to 5%, which I didn't do with him, but I did with I don't know who, but then you've got a fast fatigue resistance. And if you actually you eliminate all activity, you get fast fatigable.
Yeah.
And the size of the nerves change. And one of the earliest changes is that if you have no activity, nerves get bigger. If you have lots of activity, nerves get smaller. And so I'm writing this review at the moment exactly on this topic. Yeah. And that I think is also important to know, that with reinnovation, that this size principle applies, and that if you have a partial nerve injury, the size principle also applies. And so you actually can't change the number of muscle fibers a nerve will produce. It will always depend on its motor nerve and on the motor nerve itself, because you know, and the activity of the neuromuscular system. So that aspect, I think, is a neglected one, because it's a basic principle of movement, you know.
No, I mean, that's fascinating. I'm sure we'll all be quite excited to read the review when it comes out.
Well,
It's hoping maybe you could speak to, and I mean, I know that your presidency focused on this quite a bit, is just the role of the basic scientist in ASPN, why it's so important to have both the basic science as well as the clinical.
You know, I sort of said it before. I think the point is that all these aspects that I've talked about of neuromuscular organization, the whole look as a never mind actually application of methods to promote nerve regeneration. Also, what actually may deter nerve regeneration. And I think that these questions are there are a number of clinical scientists, including yourself, who are asking these basic questions. And but it's always in collaboration with neuroscientists, right?
Yes.
And so this collaboration is essential to have. And I think that the really you know, Susan McKinnon has always done that. You know, Ming Chang has done. I mean, Ming Chang is unusual in the fact that he's done both in his ability, but then his ability with motor unit recording comes from his work, you know, from his you know. And the other thing is that, for example, you know, we did these experiments with Dick Stein, where and actually that's another thing. We stimulated in spinal cord patients, you know, to see whether we could increase endurance, and that's another reason why, you know, I looked at 5% and so on. But you know, and we worked then with a clinical scientist. He disappeared off the map. He was a very good motor unit report, you know. He did motor unit reporting. Anyway, I don't know what happened to him. But I think that these questions of that you need to know the system, the whole system, and I think that with nerve injury in ASPN, that some of these issues don't come up at all. You know, one of the issues which I also found fascinating was with with breast cancer.
Mhm.
And you know, trying to the pain these patients have. And that, you know, that there's been this movement to try and use a nerve innovation to reduce it.
Yep.
Something like that, you know, I mean, we learn from you, and we can then go and look at important questions. That's an important question.
And so I think maybe that ties in nicely, actually, is I'll pose one last question to you is, you know, what gets you still excited about peripheral nerve? What do you think the future is? What's the next big horizon in peripheral nerve?
Oh, you know, I think you know, there's several of them. You know, I think I mentioned quite a few, but I think the thing to really concentrate in the future is sensory. I think that's been very neglected. And as far as the motor system, I think that you know, I think that one still has many basic ideas to explore and to apply them along the way.
Maybe we'll leave it there, I think. It's been fantastic to talk to you, Tessa. It's always great to catch up with you. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with me, and I'm sure the readers will agree that was fantastic cover of all things basic science in ASPN.
Thank you very much for asking me.
Good to see you, Tessa.
Yeah, good to see you. And we managed to get